all to this. I welcome all to this webinar series conducted by Nima OBGY Society. With blessings of Lord Dhanvantari, I am going to start today's webinar on the topic of eclampsia by Dr. Rajesh C. Sengupta ma'am. I welcome the dignitaries of Nima Central, Nima OBGY Central, Nima OBGY Maharashtra. I welcome our today's guest speaker, Dr. Rajesh C. Sengupta ma'am. It's our pleasure to welcome you, ma'am. Dr. Rajasi ma'am is professor and head in OBGY at Datta Meghe Medical College and Shalinitai Meghe Mother and Child Care Hospital, Nagpur. She has awarded by many awards, such as FICOG at AICOG in Bangalore 2019. She presented paper at 22nd FIGO World Congress, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in October 2018. She also presented poster at North Zone UA Foxy 2018 at Dehradun. She delivered the prestigious UA NOGS oration in 2018 March at Nagpur. She won the second prize for poster presentation in West Zone UA Foxy, Navi Mumbai in June 2017. She also got the many gold medals during her MBBS, such as Leela Dubey Memorial Gold Medal for highest marks in OBGY at MBBS third year, Pfizer Medallion for University Topper at MBBS first and second. She she is now consultant at OBGY as a obstetrician and gynecologist at Sengupta Hospital and Research Institute, Nagpur. She is ex-teaching guide for MUHS recognized fellowship course in critical care obstetrics. She worked as assistant professor at GSC Nagpur for 5 years. She is ex-visiting clinician at Mayo Clinic, Arizona at USA. She published many books such as she authored a chapter on preeclampsia and Foxy Focus, authored a chapter on law of regulating the adolescents in book released by Foxy Adolescent Health Committee on FAQs in adolescents, stroke in young, IMA, AMS General, pilot study of clinical biochemical and USG findings in PCOS in central India, and many more. Her area of interest are critical care obstetrics, runs in obstetric critical care unit in central India, gynecological surgery, third generation surgeon with expertise in various types of cancer and other surgeries. So we welcome you, ma'am, and we are very eager to hear your lecture on eclampsia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Can I request somebody to make me the host so I can share my presentation? I hope it is visible to all.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you for the kind introduction, and really sorry that we are meeting after a hiatus of like 4 5 days. Just some things didn't work out well last week, but I'm really happy to be here with you all again. And today we will be talking on the other end of the spectrum, that is eclampsia, which is one of the most important, most difficult, and most crucial complication of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. Mostly it is a complication of preeclampsia, but as we heard last time, that spectrum of cases happen related to hypertension in pregnancy, and we it sometimes is difficult because we do get patients who just present for the first time in a convulsion, and at that time it may be difficult to actually understand whether she is a preeclamptic or she is a preeclampsia superimposed on a chronic hypertension or what. But nevertheless, whenever patients are presenting in convulsions or seizures, we treat them as eclampsia unless proved otherwise. So it is basically a severe pregnancy complication which is characterized by seizures, and the patient definitely has a high blood pressure. The seizures are typically tonic-clonic, generalized tonic-clonic. So mostly it's like a grand mal epilepsy. When you are looking at focal seizures or focal with secondary generalization, you may be faced with not eclampsia, but some other entity like intracranial SOLs like tuberculomas or hydatid cyst, neurocysticercosis, etc. So whenever you are having a patient with just a focal convulsion, just a limb moving or just a twitching of the facial muscles, not exactly a complete grand mal generalized tonic-clonic convulsion, it makes sense to do an imaging earlier than later and try to find out whether you are dealing with a tuberculoma or any kind of an intracranial SOL. So eclampsia, as a rule, presents as a GTC, that is a generalized tonic-clonic. Prevalence as per WHO globally is just 0.3%, out of which the highest prevalence is in South Asian countries. That means India, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, etc. Those countries. And African American ethnicity is found to be the one of the important risk factors for preeclampsia progressing to the such type of convulsions. The etiology, it is the same spectrum of hypertension, that is basically uterine ischemia or any kind of inflammation and infection leading to certain toxic materials in the being released in the bloodstream. Then maternal obesity, gestational diabetes, and some metabolic disorders are also an etiology. Some fetal conditions, and premature aging of the placenta, and a breakdown in the maternal fetal immune tolerance. So, what actually happens is that there are certain neuromediators which are moving in the bloodstream and they reach the brain and they basically disrupt the blood brain barrier. So there is a thing called a blood-brain barrier in which the it prevents certain bad toxic substances to enter from the bloodstream into the brain parenchyma. But when there is a disruption of this blood-brain barrier, the and there and with because of onset because of long-standing hypertension, there is a problem with the auto-regulation. So what the auto-regulation does is it constricts the blood vessels in the brain and it prevents the damage due to sudden rise of blood pressure. It prevents damage to the brain. Now, when this auto-regulation is disrupted, then what happens is that when there is a rise in the systemic blood pressure, there is also rise in the brain blood vessels, the blood pressure in the brain blood vessels, and they get broken, they get damaged. So there may be small hemorrhages, there will be edema, there will be dissipation of fluid from the intravascular component to the extravascular, means into the brain parenchyma. And when there is cerebral edema, it starts creating neuronal impulses. It starts firing neuronal impulses. And that is how seizures will develop. So if you do a CT scan or an MRI brain of eclampsia patients, you will uniformly get cerebral edema. That is the consistent uniform finding. How relevant it is for our management, we'll see later. But just coming back to the pathophysiology, as I've written here, basically it's dysfunction of the blood-brain barrier and cerebral blood flow autoregulation. And then there is dysfunction of the autoregulation of the cerebral vasculature, which leads to hypoperfusion, endothelial damage, and edema. So disrupted blood flow autoregulation creates the BBB dysfunction, which allows fluids and bad proteins to enter brain tissue, and that leads to seizures. In olden days, this convulsion, this PIH or preeclampsia, was termed as toxemia of pregnancy. This is like we are talking of like maybe 4 or 5 decades ago, where it used to be routinely called as toxemia. This is a patient of toxemia. We no longer use that nomenclature. Basically, toxemia, it meant some toxic materials being generated in the body, which affects the brain, which affects so many organs and creates all sorts of end organ damage. So now we do not use that term. Now we use pre-eclampsia, eclampsia. In fact, now we use hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. So there is an evolution in the terminology with more knowledge about the pathophysiology also. This is the same thing that I have written in as in the previous slide. Basic two problems are blood-brain barrier damage and problem with the cerebral autoregulation. So that is the proposed pathophysiology of a convulsion. The risk factors are many. This is just a small list in which a personal history of pregnancy hypertensive disorders is very important. You may have a family history of preeclampsia, or the mother has, especially on the maternal side, comorbid conditions like diabetes, renal disorders, autoimmune disorders, then maternal obesity, which is with a BMI of more than 30, in fact, even more than 35. Then history of preterm births, which is less than, so that's a very early preterm, less than 32 weeks of gestation. These type of convulsions, these type of eclamptics have very bad prognosis. Now there is a thing called an early PE, in which by after 28 weeks itself patient starts getting into severe preeclampsia, and the prognosis of these patients when they are getting preeclampsia eclampsia problems before 32 weeks, the prognosis is very bad. It's very grave. So that forms an entity, a subgroup in itself, which needs to be handled with extreme care. Low socioeconomic status, insufficient prenatal care, elderly maternal age more than 35, multiple gestations, and an interval between two births, previous births, 10 or more years. And the most important of these, African American ethnicity, and nowadays, with an upsurgence of IVF, in vitro fertilization also is a risk factor for PE eclampsia. Clinical features, it's a bolt from the blue. Our textbooks actually very classical description of an eclampsia convulsion is it comes like a bolt from the blue. Suddenly सब कुछ सही था, suddenly झटका मार गई. Is the very classic history the relatives will tell you. सुबह उठ के चाय बना रही थी, suddenly झटका मार दी. So it's not actually bolt from the blue. Maybe we have missed certain subtle signs, subtle telltale signs, or certain warning signs and symptoms of severe preeclampsia. Hence, she finally presents in a complication, in a convulsion, and that's how we label it as a bolt from the blue. But that's not the case. Typically, she will have a generalized tonic-clonic convulsion. Hypertension will always be there, an aura will be there. If you ask, once the patient gains a little consciousness, or post-ictally if she is able to speak, she will tell you about headache and visual disturbances. The visual disturbances are very classic picture for preeclampsia eclampsia convulsions. Typically they will start getting black and white arrays, or they will have certain visual scotomas. Scotomas means it's a kind of a cortical blindness where the eye appears normal. Structurally, there is a problem because of cerebral edema. There is a problem in the occipital lobe. So the lobe is not able, the brain is not able to get a picture.
तुझा डोळा चेक करायचं राहिलं ना तुझे
Yeah. So the visual disturbances are very much important part of eclampsia convulsions. Then the warning signs like epigastric pain is also always preceding. So remember, whenever we are asking a history of a preeclampsia patient, a severe preeclampsia patient, headache, visual disturbances, and epigastric pain. These three warning signs and symptoms are most important. If a patient says yes to any of these, please start treating her more aggressively. Maybe refer her to a higher center. Maybe terminate her. Do a little more monitoring. But be careful because these are the patients who are in a very high risk category to progress to convulsions. When could the convulsions happen? Antepartum, intrapartum means during labor, even during a cesarean section, or postpartum. Now, those which are late postpartum, that is after 48 hours, again form an important subset. Anything between 48 hours postpartum till 7 to 10 days forms another very important category of eclampsia, again with a very bad prognosis, and they need to be monitored better. The closest differential diagnosis to a late onset eclampsia is a Press syndrome, which I'll be talking about later. So Press is basically posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome. It is a typically MRI based diagnosis. It is not a clinical diagnosis. The only way you can diagnose Press syndrome is by doing an MRI of the brain. There are some very specific areas in the brain which will show edema, and that edema is completely reversible without any sequelae once you give her steroids and diuretics. So that is why Press forms a very unique entity, and it is the closest differential diagnosis to eclampsia. What is the differentiating point is that the BP will be normal in a Press syndrome, but in eclampsia you will get a raised blood pressure. Then in cerebral venous thrombosis or a reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome, which again are close differential diagnosis of convulsions, eclampsia convulsions, is typically it will start as a focal seizure with a secondary generalization. It will not come as a generalized tonic-clonic. So that's another. Sagittal sinus thrombosis typically will present with visual disturbances and focal starting with secondary generalization. Hence, these are the two most important differential diagnosis. Investigations, you get a brief history first. You know you're dealing with a convulsion. You know you're dealing with a high blood pressure. And the investigations remain almost the same. Many times in our setup, we get patients who are unbooked cases. As we know that lack of antenatal care is one of the important risk factor for pre-eclampsia, eclampsia. So that stands true in such cases also. So complete blood counts, proteinuria, liver and kidney function tests, rule out HELP syndrome, do LDH levels. Then imaging studies like USG, sonography with her Doppler, an MRI brain purely to rule out Press syndrome, nothing else, and an EEG are important factors. In Do we do MRI every time for every patient of an eclampsia? No, there is no indication. It is not necessary unless you suspect that you are dealing with a focal seizure or a focal with secondary generalization, in which you want to rule out an ICSOL, an intracranial space occupying lesion. That's when you would want to do imaging like the CT brain or an MRI brain within first 24 hours. Otherwise, it has no role, and generally we do not do it as a routine. So MRI brain is basically for Press syndrome. This is the same thing, focal neurological deficits, prolonged coma, atypical presentations, that is after 48 hours after delivery, and an eclampsia which is refractory to the magnesium sulfate therapy. So then what is the management approach? Management approach is basically seizure control, prevention of recurrence of convulsions, and safe and optimally timed delivery, close monitored postpartum care, and immediate supportive measures. These are the 5 prongs of management approach to eclampsia. All of these have to be taken into consideration at the same time when you are dealing with treatment of a eclamptic convulsion. It cannot come one after the other. All of these 5 decisions have to be taken at the same time, and all of them are equally crucial. So the first of all, we have the initial supportive measures. We call for assistance. Remember, in any kind of obstetric emergency, as we already underlined last time also, it's important whether you're dealing with a PPH, whether you're dealing with an APH, whether you're dealing with an eclampsia, it's very important to summon your team. It's extremely important to get people around you who are going to help you, who have the same level of understanding and expertise. Other consultant doctors, your medical officers, your residents, your interns, your sisters, nursing staff, everybody should be called together to stabilize the patient. Many times we want to tie the patient's hands and fingers and wrists and everything and make her in one position, which is very wrong. It's not acceptable actually. The only thing you have to see is that she doesn't fall from the bed. You maintain a left lateral position or a lateral decubitus position and just prevent injuries by padding the rails of that bed. So there is always an eclampsia room in medical colleges, which is painted all black, and the beds are specifically padded. The rails of those beds are padded so that even if she throws a convulsion, while convulsing, she doesn't injure her limbs, her hands, feet, etc. So the old concept of tying her is very barbaric, and it should not be done. It's not a part of respectful maternity care if you're tying up your patient and like a like an animal. So please avoid doing that. The thing we need to do is restrain her, see that she doesn't get any injuries, maintain her ABC, maintain her airway, breathing, and circulation as we do in all other non-pregnant convulsions also. So airway and oxygenation are the next most important part. A simple plastic airway should be inserted. If you think that she is going to be okay after this one convulsion, you don't need to do much. Just turn her face on one side and let her breathe normally. Or you can start with a mask with oxygen at slightly higher rate of flow, say maybe up to 8 to 10 liters of oxygen also to prevent hypoxic injuries to the brain, and keep monitoring her vital signs like pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, her tissue oxygenation level, her urine output, etc. At the same time, take out a sample and send it for her basic lab studies, like what we saw in the previous slide. Now, the second part after the initial stabilization is the seizure management. So, for eclampsia, the golden rule is magnesium sulfate, nothing else. All these new drugs are all only cosmetic purposes. Eclampsia, gold standard, good old magnesium sulfate is the drug of choice. Best option, safest option, good for the mother as well as the baby, and you can never go wrong with it. Uh, there is generally a myth for saying that the Indian women don't need that whole big 14 grams dosage, which is again wrong. There have been various regimes which have been devised. There are few regimes with only 2 gram max self, saying that Indian women being slimmer and leaner than the Caucasian women don't need that much dose. But in all our years of experience, I can assure you that Pritchard's regime gives the best optimum outcome of an eclamptic patient in terms of the mother and the baby. So what is done is we generally get 50% ampules in the market. That's what we get in the stocks in most hospitals. So you give 4 grams IV bolus. Now that 4 gram means 4 ampules to be given IV. Even if we say it's bolus, it's supposed to be given slowly over 15 to 20 minutes. At the same time, while you're injecting it, you have to monitor her respiratory rate and her pulse and blood pressure. And she should not have a precipitous rise or a precipitous fall of BP. See to it that her lateral decubitus position, her oxygenation, and all are maintained and continued while you are injecting the IV bolus. After giving that bolus for 15-20 minutes slowly, then you give 10 grams deep intramuscular in the gluteus region, upper outer quadrant. You have to give deep as in the injection needle should go almost complete up to the hub inside. Aspirate, see that you're not in any blood vessel, and then inject 5 grams on each buttock. Mind you, it's an extremely painful injection. When she recovers her consciousness after the conversion, after the whole delivery and everything is done, the only thing your patient is going to complain of is the gluteal abscess and pain at the time at the site where you have been injecting her maxil. So be utmost gentle and careful. Remember that deep intramuscular means really deep intramuscular. Don't give it high, don't give it superficially, don't try to give it halfway through haphazardly because it causes gluteal abscesses very easily. So after this 14, 4 grams IV bolus plus 10 gram deep IM is given at 0 hour. Then the further monitoring of the dosages is given every 4 hourly. Simply 5 grams deep IM alternate buttocks. Before giving every other next dose, you have to remember that you have to monitor her pulse, her blood pressure, her respiratory rate. It has to be more than 18 breaths per minute. Urine output, the GFR has to be more than 25 ml an hour. So if you are giving your next dose after 4 hours, in that 4 hours, urine output should be at least more than 100 ml in that interval. And deep tendon reflexes. Typically, we see knee jerks and biceps reflex. Both should be present, neither hyperreflexic nor deep nor sluggish. If any of these conditions is not fulfilled or not up to the mark, just skip the next dose. Avoid giving the next dose. Let a further 4 hours pass. Reassess her. If then again things are fine, you give that dose. So be very careful of monitoring these 4 or 5 parameters because magnesium toxicity can set in very fast. The time that you are injecting her next 5 gram dose, she could actually go in a respiratory arrest, which you don't want that. Hence, be utmost careful about respiratory rate, urine output, and deep tendon reflexes. The serum magnesium level should be, I'm sorry, serum magnesium levels should be tested. Monitoring it's an important part of monitoring, and it should be maintained between 1.8 to 3 millimoles per liter. If at all you are faced with a micelle toxicity and the patient suddenly goes in respiratory arrest, the antidote is 10 ml of 10% IV calcium gluconate. In fact, while you are injecting her magnesium sulfate, the calcium gluconate ampule should be kept at hand, ready. In case she gets into an arrest, you have to be immediately able to break that ampule, load back calcium gluconate, and inject it to her. It's quite dramatic. The antidotal effect is very dramatic, and it reverses the toxicity of hypermagnesemia. So, magnesium sulfate for eclampsia is superior to diazepam, phenytoin, Lytic cocktail regime, and the recent new favorite little new kid on the block, that is levetiracetam. It is known as Levipil. Somehow, ICU intensivists are absolutely crazy about Levipil these days. But Levipil for generalized tonic-clonic convulsions of eclampsia is not one of the most ideal drugs. So you have to be judicious and put your foot down that she is an eclampsia. I would like to stick to good old myself. When I know that even if she's a preterm and it is going to give neuroprotection to my preterm baby, why would I want to go to a more costly drug which is not very relevant to my entity? So through various Cochrane studies, big trials, big lot of randomized control trials, we are now assured that magnesium sulfate is the best drug for treatment of eclampsia. It does not cause any maternal or newborn CNS depression. Diazepam or lorazepam does stop or shorten the seizures, but there is always a risk of respiratory or cardiac arrest. Then diazepam and phenytoin are not bad. You don't need to throw them out, but they can be considered where magnesium sulfate is contraindicated, like in cases of myasthenia gravis or hypocalcemic patients, renal failure cases, or if you have heart problems, myocarditis, heart blocks, etc. In such conditions, you can't give Maxelf. Then diazepam and phenytoin both are very good drugs. Intravenous formulations are to be considered. In case of recurrent seizures, and now once the convulsion has happened, you have given a loading dose, you have started her on treatment, and you started termination, but you see that the seizures are just not responding. So then is Pritchard's regime going to be adequate? No. You have to now put her on an infusion of magnesium sulfate. So apart from the loading dose of 14 grams of Pritchard's regime, you have to start in an infusion pump, magnesium sulfate, 2 to 4 grams has to be infused slowly over 5 minutes. Again, wait for 20 minutes. Again, after 20 minutes, you can repeat it. If not, then now you have to go ahead to further drugs, lorazepam or sodium amobarbital. We don't use these nowadays. We use lorazepam, we use diazepam, and of course, we use phenytoin. So for recurrent seizures, a higher dose, a stronger dose, and more amount of dose will be necessary with these anticonvulsants. For refractory seizures, means those who are not at all responding to magnesium sulfate. आपने पूरे डोज में दे दिया है, but it's still not improving. So that's when you have to put her on thiopentol, that is a general anesthetic. Means you have to intubate her and put her, knock her out and put her on a ventilator support now. Because now if she keeps convulsing, her brain is going to suffer hypoxic damage. Hypoxia will create more cerebral edema. Cerebral edema will create more convulsions. So she will go into a status eclamptic. It will be a constant seizure, and constant seizure means there is the during the time of convulsion there is a cutoff of blood supply, oxygen supply to the brain. Hence, we want to be careful that you intubate her, put her on a general, knock her down, and put her on a ventilatory support. Now, this has to be done in an ICU with a team trained in a multidisciplinary setup, with a team trained in treating eclampsia. And these are the conditions where imaging studies like a CT or an MRI brain should definitely be considered at earliest whenever feasible. Now, along with mother, fetal monitoring is also important. So, most of the times during seizures, we see that there will be fetal decelerations, bradycardias, tachycardias. I mean, distress will be there because that is the time mother is in hypoxia. So the placental circulation is affected, placental oxygenation is affected, baby's oxygenation is affected, and you will get apnea, sometimes a small dip, almost going up to 40 or 60 fetal heart. Then again it comes up, but still it is in the bradycardia levels. So that's how you will want to monitor, and that's how you will want to deliver her as soon as possible. Because that's where you are going to be needing to save the baby. Delivery considerations, the timing of delivery, eclampsia is an indication for delivery. We don't think about the gestational age. We don't think about how the baby is mature or not, whether it is this 32 weeks or 34 weeks and wetness all and this and that. No. If she has convulsed within 24 hours, the baby should be out. Now, if she is a vaginal delivery, previous normal delivery, or the cervical score seems absolutely fine, she's well dilated, she's in second stage when she comes to you, convulse हो गई है, 2-3 घंटे में वो deliver हो रही है, fine, give her a normal delivery. Eclampsia doesn't mean LSCS, but if you feel that if cervix is closed, DOS is closed, unfavorable cervix, primea gravida, abnormal presentation, some other risk factor is there, and in 24 hours induction से delivery तक नहीं हो पाएगा, then please take her up for an LSCS. There is no role of waiting. Once patient has convulsed, you have to terminate the pregnancy. That is the rule. If you stop, you are actually doing a criminal negligence. So severe preeclampsia तक आप रुक सकते हैं, but convulse आ गई है patient को, then you have to terminate. Then forget about how many gestations she is or any other thing, doesn't matter. You just have to terminate her. During delivery, you have to see to it that the maternal monitoring and fetal monitoring both are done very judiciously, very carefully, and maternal resuscitation has to follow. There may be times when during after convulsion, many times patient actually goes into cardiac asystole, a kind of a cardiac arrest. That's when you have to jump into giving CPR to that patient. There is no role of waiting and trying to be conservative, etc. In a situation of convulsion. Anti-natal steroids, again, as I said, if you are going to get time to give that steroid, that she may deliver in 4, 5, 6 hours, one dose of steroid, maybe 2 doses of steroid, well and good. But remember that 24 hours is that golden time where that baby should be out of the womb. Then postpartum monitoring is also important because many times patients also have a seizure in the postpartum period. And in the first 48 hours, it's very important to remember that the magnesium sulfate dosages are properly completed. That is the dosages that we give every 4 hours, the 5 grams deep intramuscular dosages. Transfer to tertiary care. Transfer to appropriate facilities in patients should be done at the stage of severe preeclampsia. You don't want her to actually convulse and then you send her in an ambulance to some far away place from your PHC or subcenter or any place else in a remote area. So, a proper triage of patients who are coming to antenatal visits at primary and secondary healthcare centers is very important. In case you see that this patient is having a higher side of blood pressure, you please refer her in good time to the tertiary care unit. Don't don't let it come that the patient has reached the tertiary hospital in a state of status epilepticus, has been convulsing since 5 6 hours, has been very morbid, maybe even a mortality is on hand in such a situation. Every mother is precious, and we should see to it that we are judicious enough and aggressive enough when it comes to dealing with severe preeclampsia eclampsia patients. Transfer has to be done absolutely in an ambulance which has medical personnel and which has monitors for monitoring the mother and the baby. This is a must. The complications of eclampsia: placental abruption, HELP syndrome, DIC, a pulmonary edema, aspiration pneumonia, arrest, cardiorespiratory arrest, acute renal failure, blood transfusion related complications, and venous thromboembolism. Can we prevent? Yes, to some extent. There are certain risk factors we saw last time in which you can empirically start low dose aspirin therapy. That is primary prevention. Secondary prevention is when BP has started to rise and now you just want to monitor your mild preeclampsia. So follow her up carefully every week. Look at her blood pressure, look at her lab tests, look at her sonography. Keep her on a monitoring every week and see to it if she's starting to go deteriorate from a mild to a severe form, start intervening immediately. Maybe give her antenatal steroids if she is preterm, maybe induce her, induce her, admit her, take her up for an elective C-section. See to it that if she is starting to show warning signs and symptoms, you may need to give her magnesium sulfate for a seizure prophylaxis. Magnesium sulfate is also used for seizure prophylaxis and it has been shown to reduce maternal deaths. Hence, as I say, how many so ever good new drugs, new molecules are coming on the horizon of convulsions, seizures, but for us, for eclampsia, magnesium sulfate remains the golden boy of our armamentarium. Postpartum management, again, magnesium sulfate is recommended to prevent eclamptic convulsions in postpartum patients with new onset hypertension and neurologic symptoms. See, there is an entity called a postpartum eclampsia, which typically patients are not having very high blood pressure antepartum. We actually get patients like 130/90, 134/92. That is the range of BP we get, and the patient suddenly throws a convulsion. That is a bolt from the blue. So that's where we have probably missed in some of our lab tests antepartum, or there was something which happened, a small embolus, which was diagnosed as eclampsia, but maybe it was actually a cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. But they do convulse. There is a subset of patients with not too high BP, but they do convulse in the postpartum period. So, postpartum management of our patients is also equally important. So, after the whole thing about eclampsia, we now again have a look at hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. And when we are looking at these four main entities, these four main classifications, we see that the only thing that differentiates preeclampsia eclampsia from the other entities is the presence of proteinuria. In chronic hypertension, you will only be having renal damages to some extent. Preeclampsia superimposed on chronic hypertension, you will have chronic hypertension starting from early pregnancy. It was already there when she became pregnant. So all through the first trimester, even before 20 weeks, she will have high BP. Now, after being superimposed, that BP levels will rise. Her control, which was there on one antihypertensive drugs, may be lost. You may need to add two or maybe even a third drug, and then lab parameters may start showing some deterioration. That is a preeclampsia superimposed on a chronic hypertension. And lastly, gestational hypertension. It is irrespective of the gestation age at which it starts, but nevertheless it ends with the gestation. Means after pregnancy there is no evidence of blood pressure there. It was there only during the pregnancy period. Hence that's gestational hypertension. The management of each of these entities, other than preeclampsia, eclampsia, remains same on the same lines as these two. That means you have to monitor her carefully, call her for more frequent ANC visits, do her lab tests, do her sonography, her Dopplers, and then at a good time, at a judicious time, terminate the pregnancy. See to it that it is done in a setup where complications can be taken care of, where you have an obstetric ICU or a multidisciplinary team, and in case the baby needs an NICU facility, blood bank facility, these are all available. So see to it that these high risk pregnancies are managed in such centers. Now we will have a quick look at some of the recent advances in this HDP spectrum. So what's new in HDP? We have a lot of talk on these predictors of preeclampsia. Although no strong evidence till date, but these are some of the things which we are still looking into. They appear very promising, they appear very interesting, very intriguing, and it's very interesting actually that we have been working so much on AI and all those stuff, but we still don't have one single strong predictor for preeclampsia. If we get that entity, we will be reducing our maternal mortality and morbidity in a very, very big manner. Because even today, hemorrhage, hypertension, and sepsis form the biggest triad of maternal mortality and morbidity. So this is an area where we want to work a lot, and a lot of progress still needs to be done. Now, again, I'm just going through a few references and few recent trends. So the classification of pregnancy-induced hypertension was revised in 2018. In Japan, the chronic hypertension has been excluded from the PIH category. But we still follow the North American, that is the ACOG guidelines, and even the European guidelines. And that is why we call it as a HDP, that is the hypertension, the same spectrum which we looked at just right now. To accelerate a comprehensive implementation of comprehensive approach, a multidisciplinary work group was created. And what they did was, in any kind of hypertensive crisis, say suppose a patient convulses at a subcenter. So what do you expect would happen there? There will be panic, there will be chaos, there will be everybody running, shouting, shrieking, maybe howling. But what happens is, in all this chaos, there are only one or two people, maybe the doctor, maybe one experienced nurse, who will know actually what is the treatment to be given to that convulsing patient. Rest of the others are in just chaos, running in a big panic, anxiety. Now what they have created is a patient safety bundle in which there are particular roles which have been given to various units. So they have looked at readiness of every unit, recognition and prevention in every patient, response for every case of severe hypertension or preeclampsia, and reporting and systems learning for every unit. So if you are looking at a patient safety bundle, HDB safety bundle, these are the four categories, broad categories in which you will look at your patient. So your unit has to be ready. Unit means not just you as a doctor, your treating staff, your paramedics, your equipment, your drugs, your stretcher, your oxygen cylinder, suction machine. Everything has to be ready and it has to be notified day in and day out whether it's ready today. Today I may get a convulsion, tomorrow I may get a convulsion. Is my unit ready? That's it. Then second is recognition and prevent. I am looking at an OPD of 50, 80, 100, 150. Am I missing a patient? Am I missing telltale signs so that, oh, she may go in for a convulsion, she may go in for a complication, she may go in for a eclampsia or a HELLP syndrome? Am I recognizing that? There are criteria laid down for that. So you don't miss any patient. Every patient, recognition and prevention. Response. Suppose a convulsion occurs. Suppose an antepartum hemorrhage occurs. Suppose a postpartum hemorrhage occurs. Is your team ready? What is the response? Do you start shouting, "Eh, tila jhatka maran lagla"? That is an absolutely wrong way to deal in any medical unit, any kind of medical unit. The moment your staff, your attendant Maushi starts screaming and shouting, or you start screaming and shouting out of panic or out of anxiety or out of an ill-equipped team at hand, you are creating a big trouble in the minds of other patients, relatives, and all the other elements which are standing around your hospital. So, response has to be decided very professional, very defined, and very practiced. And that is where the role of drills comes. We have various organizations which create these drills, eclampsia drills, PPH drills, the same way that they have practices for code blue and code red in some hospitals, especially those with NABH accreditation, they must be aware of this. In the
Yes.
same way, response of each team, each unit has to be done. And then lastly, there is a debriefing. So after the whole thing is done, maybe you have managed the patient successfully, she delivered, or the convulsion was set, or she referred her to a higher center. Then there has to be a team debriefing. What could have been done better? What went wrong? How did we miss? How did we do well? So it's a critical analysis, a feedback thinking of the whole team. It's not a blame game. You did this, you didn't do that, you shouted on me, you should have told me, you should have done. No, it's not a blame game. It's a critical analysis, it's a feedback. So we should know that, okay, next time a patient convulses in my setup, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. You decide the roles. And that is how system learning happens. And improvement in the quality of work, quality of services happens in any unit. So this patient safety bundle has been created for this same thing. So the further few slides which I will be talking are based on these four basic principles. The diagnostic criteria of severe preeclampsia have been changed. Now, is the executives, is American College of OBGYN says that these are the 5, 6, 7 criteria and 110 and above severe. Proteinuria 3+ on dipstick, more than 300 milligram in a 24-hour, severe. A thrombocytopenia, platelet count less than 1 lakh, severe. Renal insufficiency, any kind of serum creatinine levels more than 1.2. In fact, in some units, they also say that 1.2 itself is high, but some units go to 1.5. ACOG guidelines says 1.2. Impaired liver functions, especially SGOT, SGPT. We don't look at bilirubin as much. Pulmonary edema, even a mild pulmonary edema in itself is severe preeclampsia. And cerebral or visual symptoms, absolutely. So any of these are present, even if the BP is low, but any of the lower ones are present, please put her in the criteria, in the category of severe preeclampsia and treat her accordingly. Maybe induce her, terminate her, or refer her. Now, these are what we saw in the same thing, unit team education reinforced by regular unit-based drills with debriefs. Remember that your team has to undergo these drills. If you are looking at handling high-risk obstetrics, if you are looking at taking care and saving your mothers through antepartum hemorrhage, through eclampsias, through postpartum hemorrhage, then it is not you singularly as doctors who can manage the show. You have to have a team. You have to have drills done with them. सबको एग्जैक्टली मालूम होना चाहिए कि ये पॉइंट पे मुझे क्या करना है. मैं 2 जन सेम काम कर रहे हैं, 2 जन वेजोफिक्स लगा रहे, 2 जन फोलिस कैथेटर डाल रहे. फिर किसी ने पूछा कि अरे मैक्सेल्फ का है, तो 2 जन ढूंढने चले गए. फिर पता चला अरे मैक्सेल्फ की एम्प्यूल तो लास्ट मंथ ही एक्सपायर हो गई है. दैट डजंट वर्क. So if you are looking at a high risk obstetrics, drills are an essential integrated part of your team's working. And every person in the team, right from your security guard at the gate, to your ambulance driver, to your attendant, to your RMOs, all the doctors around you, maybe even your neighboring colleagues, they have to be involved in those drills. It may appear very dramatic, very theatrical, but you have to do that because that is the only way you learn. Once your staff has the practice of कि हाँ वो ड्रिल में हमको ऐसे सिखाया था, फिर जब कन्वर्सन एक्चुअली होती है पेशेंट की, देन देर इज नो श्रीकिंग एंड शाउटिंग कि ए जल्दी ला, वो वाला जो केओस वाला सीन है, दैट्स एन एब्सोल्यूट नो नो. Especially in times where we face so much medico legally, that's not acceptable in any center which deals with high risk obstetrics. So be very mindful. There are many associations who conduct and who help conduct such drills. You can get in touch with any of them. You can have an integrated workshops. You can have a half-day workshops on that, and definitely attend and get it done for your units. Um, for timely triage of women, again it's the same thing which I said. There has to be a timely triage कि ये पेशेंट प्रॉब्लमेटिक हो रही है, प्रॉब्लम की तरफ जा रही है, तो इससे मैं मेरी जगह पे जल्दी से सीजर कर लूँ, नॉर्मल कर लूँ, या इसे रेफर करूँ. ये जो ट्रियाज है, ये आपको इन गुड टाइम करना है बिफोर शी गेट्स इनटू कॉम्प्लिकेशन. रैपिड एक्सेस टू मेडिकेशंस फॉर द होल यूनिट. इट्स नॉट लाइक अच्छा अभी अपने पास तो है नहीं क्रैश कार्ड पे, बाजू वाली फार्मेसी से जाके मैं लेके आती हूँ IV लेबिटलॉल और फिर लगाऊंगी पेशेंट को. नो, इट हैज टू बी देयर इन द वार्ड, इन योर OT, इन और ऑन योर क्रैश कार्ड. दैट इज द रैपिड एक्सेस टू medications in high risk obstetric care. Then system plan for escalation, obtaining appropriate consultation and maternal transport if you're referring to another center as needed. Standard protocols for measurement and assessment of blood pressure and urine protein for all women during pregnancy and postpartum period. Standard response to maternal early warning signs, and facility-wide standards for educating women on signs and symptoms of hypertension and preeclampsia, both prenatally as well as postnatally. Again, you should have standard protocols with checklists and escalation policy means आपके सेटअप से आगे यदि ये चीज हो रही है, ये एंटिटी हो रही है जहां your setup is not able to handle for whatever reason, whether you are practicing in a rural area where you don't have a blood bank, you don't have an ICU, you don't even have an OT for a C-section, or any other issues are there, you should be able to escalate it. Escalate means you should be able to refer that patient. So आप गुड टाइम में आपको दिख रहा है कि सुबह से BP बढ़ रहा है, तो आप रात के 10 बजे क्यों ही भेजना चाहते हो? इन गुड टाइम सेंड her, no, so that she will have a better outcome there. वहाँ के डॉक्टर के लिए भी कन्वीनियंट हो जाता है. So that is the very important thing. Many times what happens is, especially in government setups where we used to work, the patients used to reach us very late. Now the barriers were several. Financial issues, ट्रांसपोर्टेशन नहीं है, रोड्स अच्छे नहीं है, वो डॉक्टर ने भेजा ही नहीं, पहले ट्रायल दे रहे थे, फिर हुआ नहीं तो यहाँ भेज दिया. सो वेरियस रीजंस आर देयर. रिजल्टेंट आउटकम क्या होता है कि पेशेंट को अच्छी केयर, जो सही केयर है, वो देर से मिलती है. सो वो होना नहीं चाहिए. वहां जाके कॉम्प्लिकेशंस होते हैं, वहां जाके इश्यूज होते हैं. So see to it that we don't miss a single mother, we don't miss a single baby, and we all work as one integrated team towards bettering our maternal care. Multidisciplinary approach and establish a culture of huddles. Huddles means the same debriefing meeting, post-event team debrief. As I said, it is supposed to be a critical analysis. What went wrong? क्या हुआ था? वो अपने यहाँ पर बैठे बैठे OPD में कन्वर्स की, क्या हुआ, फिर किसने क्या करना चाहिए था, अच्छा, पहले एयरवे देखना चाहिए था, फिर स्ट्रेचर लाना चाहिए था, फिर उसको टेबल पे बेड पे ले लेना चाहिए था।
पढ़ाई भी तो इधर ही हुआ था ना मेरा। पढ़ाई भी तो शादी के।
तो दीज आर
पढ़ाई
द
यहाँ
टाइप
वहां
ऑफ
तो हुआ नहीं। पढ़ाई तो यहीं पे हुआ।
These are the type of cultures of debriefing, which is again very important. Understand that the way in which you communicate with your team will build up their morale. They will want to learn more, and it is an essential part of practicing high risk obstetrics. It's very important to do that. Then, multidisciplinary review of all severe hypertension. You have to show your patients on an echo and ECG to a physician, to a cardiologist, to an anesthetist before you treat her. Please, we as doctors, we suffer from a condition called as intellectual arrogance, where we feel that अरे मुझे सब आता है, मैंने सब किया है, मैं 20 साल से कर रही हूँ, मैं प्रैक्टिस में 50 साल 30 साल से प्रैक्टिस में हूँ। ऐसे नहीं होता है। You are an expert in your specialty. Somebody else is an expert in the other specialty, and the patient needs that specialty expertise. So kindly involve that doctor in good time. पेशेंट का पैसा बचाने में पेशेंट की इवेंचुअली जान जाती है और पैसा ज्यादा ही खर्चा होता है। आप एंटीनेटली यदि उनका प्रॉपर वर्कअप कराते हैं, आउटकम इज मच बेटर, उनका खर्चा बचता है और आपको दुआ मिलती है, वो अलग। So, when we are looking at high risk obstetrics, remember that multidisciplinary and staff, team unity is the core of your success. Nothing else really matters. Then just a few about the ACOG guidelines for hypertensive emergencies. Nowadays, we already saw this last week itself. Oral nifedipine is they say the drug of choice, sublingual or oral. IV hydralazine and IV labetalol are the other two important drugs nowadays for severe preeclampsia. ACOG states that any of these agents can be used to treat acute severe hypertension in pregnancy. Okay. Seizure prophylaxis, it remains the same. Whenever there are severe symptoms, then magnesium sulfate should be used. It is only a seizure prophylaxis, mind you. Magnesium sulfate is not an antihypertensive. It only acts as an anticonvulsant, and it acts as a neuroprotection for the preterm baby inside the mother. That's it. ब्रेन पर ही असर है उसका, बीपी पे नहीं. सो डोंट थिंक दैट मैग्नीशियम सल्फेट दिया फिर भी बीपी नहीं उतरा, नहीं, उसके साथ आपको कुछ और एंटी हाइपरटेंसिव ऐड करना पड़ेगा. सो बी अपडेटेड विद द गाइडलाइंस ऑलवेज. Also, ACOG supports that we can use low dose aspirin. It is this task force recommendation. Foxy does not follow this. Between 12 and 28 weeks gestation, if we have known clinical factors like history of preeclampsia with an adverse outcome in previous pregnancy, multiple pregnancy, chronic essential hypertension, diabetes, renal, and autoimmune, then you can give low dose aspirin. 75 milligrams is the dose, but we use 150 milligram also. Also remember that with this drug, at this dose, you don't need to stop that if you are planning an elective LSCS. Again, that guidelines has been now revised. So if your patient is on 75 milligram और आज आज आपको उसका यदि इमरजेंसी सीजेरियन सेक्शन करना है, यू डोंट हैव टू बॉदर कि अरे वो तो एस्पिरिन पे है, वो ब्लीड होगी. नो, कुछ नहीं होता है. एट दिस डोज नथिंग हैपेंस. द डोसेज फॉर एंटीकोएगुलेशन स्टार्टिंग इज कोएगुलेशन प्रॉब्लम स्टार्टिंग इज 300 milligram for aspirin. So at 75 it is very low dose. Even at 150 it is very low dose. आप सेक्शन कर सकते हैं. But as good clinical practice, we generally stop it for 48 hours before an elective LSCS. But otherwise, nothing to worry about that. Now, there was a trial called as Aspire trial, which said that aspirin did not reduce the incidence of term preeclampsia. So, but they have tested not 75 but 150 milligram, and they said that at night it could reduce the term incidence of preterm preeclampsia, which again I said, and the preeclampsia happening before 32 weeks has more grave prognosis, has more worse prognosis. Hence, their aspirin is of good use. But for term preeclampsia, not much advantage. Then again, further predictors of preeclampsia. This is an area which is constantly under. Almost 80% of our thesis topics nowadays are based on these type of biomarkers and other markers. Various are being studied, and I hope we get some time and we get some breakthrough trial to finally tell us that yes, this is one thing. Just say with good specificity and sensitivity, we will be able to predict preeclampsia in early pregnancy, as early as maybe first trimester, 6 weeks, like that. A word about PRESS, as I said, it is basically only a clinico-radiologic syndrome. Clinico-radiologic syndrome does not have much sequelae. It is completely reversible, as the name suggests. Only thing to be given to the patient is steroids and Lasix or diuretics. Diagnosis only on MRI brain, not a CT scan. Only an MRI brain will be able to diagnose PRESS. And it may happen in some kind of, in some cases of eclampsia, concurrent PRESS may happen due to endothelial dysfunction and problem in the cerebral autoregulation. So I think that was it from me in this topic. We covered eclampsia, we covered some recent advances about hypertensive disorders, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture. And I think there are only few or no doubts in the participants left after after listening your lecture. So I request all the participants, if you have any doubt or any questions, please feel free to ask, or you can unmute yourself or put it in chat box. So, ma'am,
Ma'am, pulmonary edema is one of the means after eclampsia. It's
Yes.
like how we should manage the IV fluid management in such cases so that we should avoid this pulmonary edema and further the complications.
Very, very good question, actually. So, pulmonary edema may happen because of two reasons. One is fluid overload, and the other one is because there is a problem in the capillary level damage. So, fluid by itself starts extravasating into the tissue, interstitial spaces, and creating pulmonary edema. The diagnosis has to be done with tachypnea, where the rise of rise of respiratory rate is more than 23, sometimes even 30 breaths per minute. Shallow labored breathing is there. SpO2 levels will start falling. Any SpO2 at room below 94% should be alarming. At pulmonary edema, the SpO2 may go as low as even 80, 70, like that. Anything below 80 can cause permanent brain damage also, even if it is just for a minute. So testing that on your monitor is very crucial. Clinically, on a stethoscope, you will get basal crepitations. On lung basis, on both sides, if you auscultate, you will get that kind of small cooing sounds, crepts, basal crepts. That is the first earliest indicator of a clinically of a pulmonary edema. The treatment is very simple. You have to give her Lasix. Lasix and only Lasix. Antenatally, when the pregnancy is inside, the only indication of giving Lasix is pulmonary edema. What is the dose? It is up to 40, even up to 120 milligrams. You can give Lasix. It is a very fast acting loop diuretic. The onset of action is hardly like 5 to 6 minutes. She will start pouring urine in her catheter, and then you know that her SpO2 is improving, oxygen on nasal oxygen or even room oxygen, and she will start feeling better. The respiratory rate will settle down, tissue oxygenation will start improving, cyanosis will reduce. So Lasix is the drug of choice. Please give it very judiciously. Postpartum, again, same thing. The second point what I told was the reason for having fluid overload leading to pulmonary edema. It is one of the, I will say it is it almost amounts to a negligence if because of our fluid overload, iatrogenically we create pulmonary edema for such patients. So the rule of thumb for IV infusion for pre-eclamptic patients or eclampsia patients is you have to transfuse IV fluids at the rate of 75 to 85 ml an hour. Means
Okay.
1 hour may not even 100 ml of the IV fluid should go. The rate should be so less, just 75 ml. So if you maintain at that, If you maintain her hydration at that, while you are delivering, while you are doing her cesarean, and once then the baby is out, the placenta is all removed, and then you give her Lasix, maybe 20 milligram IV stat Lasix, then you are putting her in a negative pressure, a negative deficit, intravascular volume you have reduced. So tissue fluid will start coming back into the intravascular component. So that is how you will start treating, reversing the pathology of preeclampsia. But mind you, till the placenta is in place, this prophylactic Lasix will not help, will not work. In fact, it will create intravascular hypotension and create more DVT, maybe emboli. So it is kind of contraindicated. तो Lasix देना है तो डिलीवरी प्लासेंटा निकलने बेबी डिलीवरी के बाद. Antepartum only and only indication of Lasix would be to give in the cases of pulmonary edema. So that's it. So if I answered your question, the IV fluid should be given at the rate of 75 to 85 ml hour only. And please very stringently monitor her intake and output. Wherever catheter is kept, the color of the urine, whether it is dark colored or normal colored, light colored, like water, it is a good specific gravity of urine. Highly concentrated urine, that means urine flow is less. Maybe kidney functions are damaged, and here you are pouring in IV fluids in her body. Eventually, she will end up in a pulmonary edema. So, stringent intake output charting has to be kept in your HDU in your unit.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. The next question is, if the patient is grand multipara or polyhydramnios, or she is prone to having a PPH after delivery. So in this case, is there any caution should we take while using the magnesium sulfate, as its side effect is tocolysis also?
So actually, tocolysis where it is needed, because see, preterm labor and tocolysis is a very big spectrum. The kind of medicines we have nowadays, एक्चुअली हर एक नग है, हर एक नमूना है, हर एक का एक एरिया है. जैसे प्री टर्म विथ प्री एक्लैम्सिया है, माय ड्रग ऑफ चॉइस बिना सोचे वुड बी मैग्नीशियम सल्फेट. माय सेकंड ड्रग विल बी नीफेडिपिन. Now, if there is no problem of pre-eclampsia, if the BP remains normal, and ऐसे ही सिर्फ preterm करके आई है, तो मैं सबसे पहले rather than tocolysis, I will see whether there is infection. So I will rule out that urinary infections, vaginitis, etc. In third category, what you are saying is like a case of polyhydramnios, where there is massive distension of abdomen, uterus distended hai, and that is the reason you may get into preterm labor. In such conditions, if the BP is normal, isoxsuprine itself is good enough. Don't need to go for magnesium sulfate and all that. But yes, of course, if you want, it is a very good drug. Neuroprotection is an added positive effect. 1 to 2 grams per hour infusion लगाइए, 1 hour का infusion चलाइए. The thing should her tocolysis should be adequately achieved. After that, only if you keep on giving her every 8 hourly, that is good enough. Remember, this tocolysis has to be continued not more than 24 hours. If beyond 24 hours she's still having pain, she's still having contractions, you have to change your tocolysis, or you have to revisit your diagnosis. That maybe you're missing something. The causative factor of her problems, the inciting factor for starting of her preterm labor pains, you have to revisit. So this tocolysis will never go beyond 24 hours.
मैम एक्चुअली उनका कहना ये था कि मैग्नीशियम सल्फेट से टोकोलिसिस हो सकता है, और ग्रैंड मल्टीपैरा में डिलीवरी के बाद पीपीएच के चांसेस ज्यादा है, क्योंकि
नहीं
ऑलरेडी
नहीं
लैक्स
नहीं,
यूट्रस
इसीलिए
रहते
मैं
हैं.
बोल रही हूँ 1 to 2 grams per hour की जो ड्रिप आप लगाते हैं, विद इन 1 hour वो ड्रिप से टोकोलिसिस मतलब स्टॉपेज ऑफ यूट्राइन कॉन्ट्रैक्शंस हो जाता है. दिस इज नॉट टू बी carried forward for beyond 24 hours. And I expect that you will be monitoring your patient, no? So if patient is dilated beyond 2 centimeter, you don't want, there is no role of tocolysis. तो 2 सेंटीमीटर के आगे वो 24 घंटे में डिलीवर भी होती है, तो तब तक तो आपका मैक्सल बॉडी से मेटाबोलाइज हो गया है ना. So
Okay.
there is no
Yes.
role like that.
Okay.
So
Okay.
before you start tocolysis, you first do a PV. You do a PS. प्रीटर्म PROM हुआ है क्या, लीकिंग है क्या, वेजाइनाइटिस है क्या, और यदि डायलिटेशन ही है तो आप टोकोलिसिस दोगे तो ये तो मतलब इट इज नॉट, आई मीन इट, that is not the way in which you treat preterm labor, you know, an established preterm.
Okay. Okay.
तो
Yes,
टोकोलिसिस
ma'am.
का एक्चुअली कॉन्सेप्ट बहुत लोगों को समझता नहीं है. इट इज
नहीं,
बेसिकली ओनली यू बाय टाइम in 24 hours to complete your steroidal dosage. That is the actual only role of tocolysis. It is not कि आप 7 दिन तक उसको टोकोलिसिस देते रहो, सुला के रखो और फिर उसको घर भेज दो, फिर 2 हफ्ते बाद बुलाओ. तो दैट मीन्स उसको वो टोकोलिसिस को भी जरूरत ही नहीं थी. Tocolysis is threatened preterm. Dilatation is less than 2 centimeter. Less than 2 centimeter dilatation of cervix. Contractions आ रहे हैं. Other inciting factors have been ruled out. You want to cover her steroids. And RCOG says कि सिर्फ आप 34 वीक्स तक ही आप स्टीरॉइड्स दीजिए एंड टोकोलिसिस दीजिए. उसके आगे 35 वीक्स में, 36 वीक्स में यदि आपकी पेशेंट आती है तो प्रोग्रेस होने दो, टोकोलिसिस का रोल नहीं है उसमें. IV टोकोलिसिस ओनली 24 आवर्स. ओरल यदि आप देते हो निफेडिपिन या डिवाइडिलोन टैबलेट जो देते हैं, ओनली 7 days, नथिंग बियॉन्ड दैट.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. The next question is, any protocol about cardiac evaluation in ANC care for PIH patient or before induction or before pre-LSCS workup?
Dr. Jagruti,
Yes,
let
absolutely.
them to ask and interact
Okay,
with
ma'am. Sure. Sure, ma'am. Dr. Balaji, sir.
Yes, good evening, ma'am. Hello.
Yes, sir.
In any PH patient, just like we do animal scan at 20 weeks, just like any cardiac protocol to evaluate the cardiac condition in PH, in 8 weeks, 2 week, or any cardiac evaluation you needed.
Sir, actually, you were very, I couldn't hear you, but what Jagruti said, is that the same question, protocol for cardiac evaluation?
Cardiac evaluation.
Yeah. So, in our unit, we have a protocol. Whenever a patient is diagnosed, say, by definition, it is beyond 20 weeks. So, if she is diagnosed before 32 weeks, then we see to it that we are doing a cardiac evaluation, including an ECG and an echocardiography immediately at the onset of her diagnosis. If not, then as a routine in our unit, we do a echocardiography of every patient at 32 weeks. Why? Because by pregnancy physiology, there are 2 times when the blood volume will peak. So if there is a baseline or an underlying cardiac dysfunction, a myocardial dysfunction, it will be evident at these 2 times. The first time is at 10 weeks of pregnancy. That is when there is a first peak of rise of blood volume. After that, blood volume slowly increases. And then second peaking is at 32 weeks. So at 32 weeks, as a routine protocol, we do an ANC, USG and a Doppler for all babies, all ANCs in our unit. And we also do a mother's echocardiography. We do that as a routine. So this helps us because we have created a baseline study at 32. So in conditions not just pre-eclampsia or eclampsia, even in myocarditis, even in peripartum cardiomyopathy, even sometimes Takotsubo's, or even an abrupt pulmonary edema. So we know what was her baseline findings, and we are able to diagnose and differentiate whether this happened now or it was an earlier dysfunction. Accordingly, treatment is monitored. If we find that at 32 weeks, she is having some baseline systolic dysfunction or maybe the ejection fraction is not good, or it appears a little hypokinetic, any kind of indications, we keep her on a close monitoring, we do a full cardiac evaluation, and then we follow her through. But with pre-eclampsia patients, definitely there is a large amount of cardiac dysfunction. And at any time that you do a diagnosis, please get your patient's echocardiography from a good cardiologist done, a person who understands echo, because it's a very specialized test. And I mean, there are a lot of people who hold the probe, but very few who actually understand how to interpret what is seen on the screen. So it's essential. It's a little expensive, um, but imagine in a condition like a peripartum cardiomyopathy where patient just goes in heart failure, deliver ho jati hai heart failure, or maybe even
Yes.
mortality. We are at a
I
complete
I was
loss.
same incidence in last year with peripartum cardiomyopathy.
Hello?
I faced the same incidence of peripartum cardiomyopathy
Yes,
in
yes,
here.
sir. So it is a medical legal, it is a very catch-22 situation for us.
Yes.
Patient and her family will blame you कि आपने हमारी पेशेंट का आपकी वजह से हमारी पेशेंट हार्ट फेल होके मर गई. तो आपके पास क्या अदर what is the other evidence you have? And again, like just like eclampsia, peripartum cardiomyopathy comes like a bolt from the blue. There are no predictors. He just goes into heart failure. So a 32-week baseline echo always helps. It's for your good, for patient's good also.
Thank you.
And it's not very expensive these days. You get a good quality echo at maybe 1,000, 1,200. I think all patients are able to bear that much cost. I mean, everybody nowadays uses a smartphone. It's not very expensive. Earlier days, it used to be very expensive, 3, 4,000. But nowadays, the costs are very less. But please get it done from a good cardiologist. Just send to a cardiologist. Don't even go to a physician or an anesthetist or anybody. Cardiologists, they are trained and they will give you a best report. So we follow this protocol, and there are no guidelines to say for a universal screening at 32 weeks. None of the association says that. No FOXY, not RCOG, not ACOG. But in our unit, because we have handled such cases where patients suddenly went into cardiac arrest or went into failure, cardiomyopathy, so we then made this SOP for ourselves.
Thank you.
There is a biomarker you can use, NT-proBNP, which depicts your myocardial damage. But you should do that only if your echocardiography, your baseline echo scan looks bad. Only then you do it. Otherwise, no need. That is an expensive one.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it's very sensitive to test to diagnose myocardial damage, heart failure cases.
Thank you.
Ma'am, which factors are there on which we can predict, or we can say that for the prognosis depends for the eclampsia?
For eclampsia, first and
Yeah.
foremost, the convulsion delivery interval. First and foremost.
Okay.
कन्वर्शन आने के बाद आप
Okay.
कितनी जल्दी बेबी को निकालते हो, उस पर मदर का और बेबी का दोनों का बेसिक हेल्थ डिपेंड करता है. देन ऑल अदर
Okay.
थिंग्स आर सेकेंडरी, कि बीपी का लेवल कितना है, प्राइमरी है, मल्टी है, मल्टीपल जेस्टेशन है, सर्वाइकल स्कोर कितना है, फिर आपने उसको इंड्यूस किया कि नहीं, ये सब सेकेंडरी है. The single most
Okay.
important factor is convulsion to delivery interval. And that is why
And
we
then
say, when I showed you that diagram, that all
Uh-huh.
5 things have to happen at the same time. You stabilize her, you control her seizures, you start delivering her, you give her prophylaxis, you take care of the postpartum. Everything has to be at the same time.
Okay.
And
And
that
this
is why you need a team. That is why you need a multidisciplinary approach.
yes, yes. And that occurrence of coma in between that convulsions is also a predictable factor for that.
If you give her a good Maxelf dose, madam, actually I'm telling you, I mean, I'm totally biased to Maxelf. These post-ictal unconsciousness levels are very, very minimized in Maxelf. Very minimized. If she has been in coma and unconsciousness in between convulsions, she is already come to you in a situation of status eclampticus, where hypoxic
Yes.
brain damage has occurred and is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an ominous sign. It is status actually you're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they are typically generalized tonic-clonic, and it will have aura, a convulsive phase, and post-ictal phase, where she will be in confusion. But then
Yeah.
there, after post-ictal, she has to regain consciousness. If she is
Hmm.
unconscious, that means she is in status eclampticus, like that.
Yes, that's what I was asking.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
condition of status
But
eclampticus.
single convulsion history है, आप जितना जल्दी आप how aggressively you treat and terminate, that will give a very favorable outcome to patients.
Next question, Jagrati.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is from Dr. Vasuprabha, ma'am. How to deal with patient convulsing during cesarean section? Any protocol for that, or what precautions to take to deal with the same?
You mean an intrapartum eclampsia?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's the same
During
thing.
cesarean section.
If
Ma'am.
during normal delivery a patient convulses, at what stage of delivery she is, like if head is at perineum, then please deliver while your team supports her. Deliver the baby out first, then support her, then start her on antihypertensive and anticonvulsants, magnesium sulfate. If it's in the first stage of labor, you are trying to give a normal delivery, then first take care of that convulsing patient. Stabilize her, give her Maxelf, then assess. Now, if the cervix is good and you think maybe in an hour or two she will deliver nicely dilated cervix, head is down, and descended well, good average size baby. You think maybe in 4 5 hours before her next dosage she can deliver very nicely? Yeah, give her a try. Keep her on monitoring, give her a trial. If you think no, the cervix is not very good and she has convulsed now, just 2 centimeter dilated. I have been inducing her and she's convulsed now. Forget all that. Just do a cesarean section. Maxelf deke under GA, do a cesarean section. There again comes the role of your anesthetist. Most anesthetists feel scared. There are some people nowadays they want to give spinal. They are very scared of giving a GA. I think for such cases, GA is a boon. Like even if she keeps convulsing intraoperatively, I have knocked her out. Now she is not going to convulse. I can peacefully do my cesarean, close her completely, give her maybe blood or FFP depending upon how is her hemoglobin level and all, and nicely take care of her postpartum, postoperatively in the HD or ICU. So GA intubation is the one of the best modalities. In fact, it should be the anesthesia of choice for eclampsia. But there I have seen people कि अभी तो कन्वर्शन ठीक हो गई ना, अभी पेशेंट कॉन्शियस है ना, तो फिर उसको स्पाइनल देके सीजर करते हैं, which is not an appropriate thing to do. So GA and then exsection and then
Be clear
ICU.
about the extubation, actually. So most of the time, I
Madam, even if she doesn't extubate, what is the worst case scenario? She is completely under control. She will not have aspiration. She will not have convulsions. You can easily taper her off after 24 hours. They come out very well. Not even 24 hours. Even in 2 hours, 3 hours later, after in the ICU, you extubate her. You're good. You have covered the acute phase of the entity. You have removed the inciting factor, which is the placenta. And I think management will be always better if you do it under GA. I mean, you should insist. Your team should be strong enough that your anesthetist is not scared to give a GA.
Yeah.
Yes.
Usually with the magnesium sulfate toxicity, we use antidote calcium and
Calcium gluconate.
yeah. But how we should means at the borderline, how should we predict, and with the calcium gluconate, the supportive treatment we should give.
If there is a toxicity, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So no, ma'am, at 0 hour, in case there is a toxicity, you see that her respiration is going down, just stop magnesium immediately. Like आप halfway through भी injection में है और तुरंत निकाल दीजिए उसको. Load calcium gluconate and give her the entire 10 ml of 10% calcium gluconate. Put her on IV oxygen mask and see to it that her thing improves. If typically in one dose of the 10 ml, all kinds of toxicity will revert, because when you are actually monitoring her, you will know that her serum magnesium levels will not suddenly rise to 9 or 10. It will go from 3 to 5 to 7 to 9. At every one point, first DTRs will go, then the urine output will reduce, and lastly the respiratory rate. So if you are looking at respiratory rate, you should have known that urine output उससे पहले ही कम हो गया है और DTR भी उसके पहले ही बंद हो गए. सो ये रोल है प्रॉपर मॉनिटरिंग का. सो ऐसे नहीं है कि अब बस आके आप देख लो कि हाँ अभी 4 घंटे हो गए चलो मैक्सल लगा दो. Monitoring is very crucial. And if you feel there is a doubt in any of these 3 parameters, just withhold that dose. कुछ नहीं होता. 4 घंटे बाद दीजिए ना. Doesn't matter. You have taken care of the other 5 prongs. So this is only one part. It doesn't cover the BP, only the convulsion. But she has to be safe also. In case one dose of 10 ml of 10% calcium gluconate does not help, after 20 minutes you can repeat it. But if you feel that she's still again into respiratory arrest or something, then it is prudent to intubate her and put her on ventilation,
Yeah.
ventilatory support.
Mhm.
You should not lose a patient
Yeah.
waiting too much.
Mhm.
So critical care obstetrics is a little bit more aggressive and fast decision making that as compared to other patients, your threshold of acting has to be a little lower than the normal obstetric patients in critical care.
मैम और ऐसे केस में अगर मैग्नीशियम टॉक्सिसिटी है, कैल्शियम ग्लूकोनेट दिया, लेकिन कन्वर्जेंस कंट्रोल में नहीं है, तो हमें दूसरे ड्रग पे शिफ्ट करना चाहिए तभी
हाँ
ये
शिफ्ट करना
Yes.
चाहिए, बिल्कुल शिफ्ट करना
Yes,
चाहिए.
yes,
मैं तो
yes.
ये भी बोल रही ना, आप उसको इंट्यूबेट करा दीजिए, कोई बात नहीं. इंट्यूबेट करा दो, सेक्शन करा दो. द कन्वर्शन हैज टू स्टॉप वंस यू रिमूव द प्लेसेंटा. हैज टू.
Mm.
If it doesn't stop, you are dealing with something other than eclampsia. CT
Mhm.
या ब्रेन MRI ब्रेन करवाओ, देखो अंदर कुछ और गड़बड़ चल रही है क्या. क्योंकि प्री एक्लैम्पशिया ट्रीटमेंट इज डिलीवरी. ये एक मैक्सिम है, ये एक प्रिंसिपल है. ये भूला, कुछ भी हो जाए ये चेंज नहीं होगा. एक्लैम्पसिया है, बहुत ज्यादा कन्वर्शन आ रहे हैं, आप उसको टर्मिनेट सेक्शन कराओ, बेबी निकालो, प्लेसेंटा निकालो, सूचर करते तक she should stabilize. In an hour she should stabilize. If she is not, maybe you're dealing with some other entity.
Mhm. Yes. And ma'am, if patient come with our setup, which is in the rural area, and she's convulsing, she's in seizures, and we don't have a proper team with us, so should we
Yeah.
stabilize her first, or should we refer at
Yes.
that time also?
Always you should stabilize, give her first aid. That is the basic ethics as a
Yes.
doctor, as in any healthcare provider. Forget whether you're practicing even like a neem hakim under the tree. But if a patient is convulsing in front of you, at least आप मुंह तो साइड में करोगे उसका.
Yes, yes.
You will prevent aspiration pneumonitis.
Yes.
bare minimum आप कर सकते हैं, जितना आपके सेटअप में आप फिजिबल है जरूर करिए.
Okay.
Just be alert that you are able to provide. साल भर में एक भी पेशेंट को आप फर्स्ट एड देके रेफर सही टाइम में कर सके और उसकी जान बच गई, यू डूइंग अ ग्रेट जॉब.
Yes. Or should we give at that time a prophylactic or a bolus dose of MJSO4 or
If you
yes.
can, if you have it in your drugs
Yes.
in your setup, yes, please give. Please
Okay.
give the full dose and then refer.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
नहीं है, डायजीपम देके आप भेजिए उसको, आईवी डायजीपम देके भेजो, एक ऑक्सीजन सिलेंडर भेजो, वो एम्बुलेंस में अपनी एक नर्स को या आरएमओ को भेजो साथ में. बट if it is feasible, the earlier she gets that anticonvulsant, वहां पहुंचते तक उसको उतना तो सपोर्ट, 1-1.5-2 घंटा जितना भी उसका सफर है ट्रांसपोर्टेशन का, she will have
Yes.
some coverage, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Jagrati, we are running with the time now.
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Yeah, it's almost 8:30 now.
Yes. So, thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful lecture and resolving our all the doubts. So I will go for the vote of thanks. So I would like to thank dignitaries of NEMA Central, NEMA OBGY Central, NEMA OBGY Maharashtra. I firstly thank Dr. Rajasri ma'am for this wonderful lecture. I also thank to Dr. Akash sir and Dr. Prajakta ma'am for all the support. Last but not the least, I thankful to participants to attending this lecture. Now, with due permission of all the dignitaries, I am concluding today's lecture. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thank you very much for such a wonderful treat. We have preeclampsia, eclampsia, as in, means both the sequels. Thoroughly we enjoyed and thoroughly we learned a lot. Basic points, basic things have learned in during our PG. We have revised everything and even we got some new protocols with that. Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thanks for this treat.
Nice to interact with all of you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.